Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining me again today. I'm really looking forward to speaking with you again about how you can develop data-driven supports using our LEA toolkit. Please do me a favor and click the green check if you can hear me. Thank you very much. Much appreciated. Just check. Okay, so if you are unable to hear me, I encourage you to take a look at some of the slides that we created to help you access all the features of this webinar. First things first, if you don't have computer audio, check your connections. It'll automatically connect to default audio sources. So go ahead and adjust your computer audio settings as you need to make sure that you're able to hear. You're all automatically muted when you come on, because if we all try to talk at once, it's quite unpleasant with the feedback. But should I need to unmute someone for questions, I certainly will do so. Give me one moment. I see in the chat that someone's not able to hear. Just one moment. Okay, thanks, guys. Next, the easiest way to view what we're going to be doing today is to select floating panel view. And that's this one with the several panels. Finally, if you're wondering what I was talking about when I said click the green check, here we have the participant tools. You have the ability to raise your hand, which makes a high-pitched beep into my ear, so I'll only ask you that if I really, really want some feedback. And the green check, there's an X there as well, okay? You can also communicate with me using the chat feature. I'm not going to be having you use the annotate tools today, and I will unmute you if we're going to have a conversation, just to kind of keep things under control in terms of how many people are speaking at once. But here are some tools that you can use. All right. So one more time, can I get all green checks if you can hear me? Do another check. I had a couple of folks who could not hear. Okay, good, good, good. So if you could, if you just did a green check, uncheck yourself. Just click it again and it'll go away. There we go. That way I'll know if you're answering the current question or not. So this is the last offering in a series that's been going on since June 17th, serving students with disabilities during periods of remote or blended learning. I am incredibly excited to share this with you today. I just want to do a couple of housekeeping things first. I'm going to drop a survey link into the chat at the end of the session. I'm going to use it to record attendance, send PLUs, and gather feedback to inform future offerings. So this summer session is not the last time that I'm going to be offering training related to these tools. And so I'm going to use the feedback that you give to improve the offerings that will come out in the fall and the spring. So please do give me your feedback. Also, please ensure that you're hanging around at the end so that you can get that survey link and I can mark you as present, especially if you want to get those PLUs. So I'm Jennifer Carpenter. I am a PD specialist for OSSI. I'm so glad that you're here. I cannot begin without giving a huge shout out to my partner in crime, Kelly Scholl. She's a data analysis manager for OSSI, and she's the creator of the actual tools that are part of this toolkit. We're going to take a look at those tools later today, and we've looked at them in previous sessions. I see some of my folks that were struggling to get in have made it. Hooray! Okay, so some disclaimers. give this disclaimer every time, but I am going to continue to say this because it's really important that we just recognize off the bat that none of us are experts in what we're trying to accomplish right now with our students. So I'm not going to be here providing you with answers, but more mechanisms for seeking answers and potential solutions to problems as they arise, and to create systems and procedures in your LEA school or classroom that will enable you to quickly identify problems or barriers that require quick solutions. So I'm going to go through a few things that we're going to be using today. This is going to be one of those situations where you have a lot of tabs open, okay? So forgive me for that in advance. So here we are. We have the LEA toolkit itself. So I sent you that in your invitation. I believe it's also attached to the webinar through WebEx. This is the guidance document that gives you context for all the tools that we're going to look at today and how they fit together. So I'm just going to scroll down to some links, okay? So there you're going to see links to the foundational guidance from the Department of Ed and also OSSE that are, well, foundational to the tools that we've created today, and we'll get into that more later. But you'll also see links to the actual tools that we'll be exploring and using together. I just want to point out that it's better if you use this, which is the sample electronic forms and tools that are put into one long PDF as we go through these today, because if you try to click these links and make copies and open every single thing, you're going to fall down a rabbit hole of tools, and it will be difficult to sort of keep up in the short amount of time that we have together. So that's the second resource that we'll have, is this electronic version of the forms and tools that you can follow along with me using this. Third, as we go through the toolkit, you're probably going to have a lot of questions about how to put the toolkit together. You don't need to dig into this now. You can look at the nuts and bolts of this at a later time, but I just want you to know that you have a user guide right here that when you have a technical question, you can dig around in this user guide and work it out. But if you don't find the answer there, you have my email address, and you can always reach out to me, and Kelly and I can get back to you as soon as possible. Just one moment. I'm going to respond about the question about the sound. Actually, Mr. Pike, can you give me a green check if you can hear me? All right. So in the chat box, if someone would take it upon themselves to, if you get a message to all participants that you can see that they're saying that they can't hear and I don't respond right away, if somebody could do the hand raise so I get a little beep in my ear, I would really appreciate that very much. Thanks. All right. I already told you about the survey, so we're good there. Now, we're going to be using this digital chart paper, our Data-Driven Support Solutions Tracker. This is where we're going to take notes and record solutions today. I shared the link to that in the email, but I'm also going to drop it in the chat box now. Right. So now that I've dropped it in the chat box, I'm going to wait and see if lots of little anonymous animals show up. And I know that we're in our digital chart paper. This is probably the most important aspect of what we're going to do. you've been to my trainings before, you know that they're not typically sit and get, and that's new for me to sort of give this kind of webinar without a lot of participant interaction, engagement. And particularly now, we need to be recording the wisdom of our colleagues as we try to generate novel solutions to novel problems. And so I am going to ask you to participate fully in answering the questions, the discussion questions we have today, and dropping them in this digital chart paper. You may come across a problem later that you wish you had, you still remember the great idea you had when you were trying to figure out how to address a certain barrier or solve a certain problem with communicating with families. And you may benefit, too, from the ideas of your peers. So I encourage you all to open this up so we get to the part where we're actually going to come up with some solutions together. We're ready to do that. Okay, so those are the things that you should have. And we will get started. All right, so the objective of this session is really, it's the big idea of all the sessions that we've done. If you've attended a previous session, please do me a favor and give me a green check. If you've attended previously, wonderful. Really glad to hear it. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, great. We really are providing you with something that is basically an MTSS student data dashboard. And so I want you to think about that as we go through this conversation about how we can serve students with disabilities. I want you to think about ways that these tools are useful beyond special education service provision and documentation, and think about how you can adapt these tools to use more broadly in your school, LEA, or classroom. So we're going to look at some sample systems and some tools that feed into that system and think about how we can collect and review data at a distance, how we can use that data to measure the efficacy of our universal, targeted, and individual supports as we work our way through continuous education and recovery, and then think about ways to use the data to consider the educational benefit received by students with disabilities so that during the recovery period, you are always documenting how the student's doing and all of your efforts so that post-recovery, when we start making calculations about educational benefit, you will be prepared to do so using data. On the subject of continuous education and recovery planning, I just want to note that it has really made my day to hear that folks who have been attending these sessions have been applying this information to draft continuous education and recovery plans at their LEAs to turn into OSCE to describe how they're going to serve students, particularly that section about students with disabilities. It really makes me very happy to see that we've been helpful in helping you think through that. As you get to implement these continuous education and recovery plans, please don't hesitate to reach out to us if you need additional information about the bits and pieces of the tools we've provided that will be most helpful to you. All right, so as always, we're going to take a quick little dive into the key principles of special education service provision. I know I've said it before, but I'll say it again. We have aligned these tools to not just some key principles that are aligned to foundational regulations, but also just evidence-based practice and our values as educators, and we'll see more about that in a moment. Just note that this does not say key principles of special education service provision in a remote context or in the middle of a pandemic. These principles were existing before. They were foundational before. They're especially important now. we want to make sure that we're helping you develop systems that are going to help you not just now when you're in remote or potentially blended contexts, but later when you're back in brick and mortar schools, and that those systems help you connect policy to practice so that you don't have one set of procedures for IDEA compliance and another unrelated system that helps you improve outcomes for kids. IDEA regulations actually exist to support individualized effective practices. They don't exist in a vacuum. I know it doesn't always feel. All right. This is just an overview of those key principles. So far, we've talked about LEA discretion and flexibility, the idea that IDEA actually provides you with the flexibility to respond to new situations, and that you have the discretion to do so as long as you continue to partner with parents. And that in partnering with parents, you are transparent in your communication, not just with parents, but also students. And you're transparent as you're identifying barriers and solutions, and that you're documenting those team decisions that you're making together. Today, we're going to be thinking about data-driven efforts to address students' needs. The requirement is that if we're going to be data-driven, right, we have to be student-specific, and that we're going to consider and prepare to consider receipt of educational benefit. That's why we're really here, right? That's why we've been here this whole time with this great data tool, to figure out how to identify what students need now, what they're going to need when the school year starts again virtually, what they're going to need when we eventually transition to blended or brick and mortar contexts, and how we can collect the data that we need to respond to those needs and to identify tiered supports for all of our students. So, as always, to meet the obligations that you have under IDEA, every student must receive services and an IEP that's reasonably calculated to enable them to make progress in light of their circumstances. In this situation, right, everyone's circumstances have changed, but our consideration of how circumstances have changed for each student continues to need to be student specific, despite the fact that all students are experiencing a change at the same time. Using data to individualize special education provision has always been the requirement. Many of you have joined me for the IEP Quality Series. Bring what you've learned there to our conversation today and our problem solving today. You will see that the tools that I have created and that Kelly and I have created together were not created in a vacuum. We didn't reinvent the wheel. We took what we knew was evidence-based and made it more accessible in a digital format. If you haven't had a chance to attend the IEP Quality Series, or you anticipate new hires that are going to need the support, I just want to let you know that next week we're going to announce our fall PD schedule. And one of the things that I'll be offering is an online class that's going to go for 8 weeks this fall. It's just going to spread out that IEP Quality Series over time, and the format will look very much like an online graduate seminar. Please do me a favor, and when you complete the survey today, if you anticipate that you're going to want to access that online class this fall, or that you have folks that you have are new hires that didn't get trained last year, just let me know by adding that in the when there's a question to ask you if there's more support that you need. Just let me know. Just be specific about that so that I can anticipate that you want to participate and ensure that you are able to do so before it fills up. So, in circumstances that cause these unanticipated interruptions to instruction, or shifts to different or between different models of instruction or service delivery, IEPs have to continue to collect and use data to review the impact of the lapse in services for each student. This is just to underscore that this is a student-by-student basis. All right. Just a reminder that an IEP is a continuous improvement instrument, and the instruments that I'm going to share with you today feed into a continuous improvement instrument for your systems and your programming. The tools we'll discuss today are designed to collect student-level data and family input so that you're able to continuously individualize and improve individual students' instruction services and supports, but it also allows you to aggregate input at a caseload, school, or LEA level so that you can look across all of the needs and determine what need there is for support at different tiers. What things are universally needed, what intervention should you be focused on, and then where are you seeing a need for more intensive individual or small group support. All right, so our focus today is providing data-driven supports in the remote or blended learning context. In order to do that, in order to base our decisions and our supports on data, we have to be able to assess students, and we have to be able to get input from the students themselves, their families, and the educators that serve them. Otherwise, you're not going to have much data to work with. Secondly, we need to make sure that we're using appropriate assessments to understand each student's need for support. And finally, we need to think about how we're going to use the tools that we'll discuss today to consider individual students' receipt of educational benefit. So as you're working to balance LEA discretion and flexibility with IDA's requirements, as circumstances change, you're going to need to find new ways to conduct assessments, to collect stakeholder input, and to use the data you accumulate to develop and deliver supports that are delivered in different or shifting contexts. Each of the solutions that we're going to be seeking today is going to connect to one or more tools. So I just want to give you a reminder if you haven't already attempted to access the tools. Could you please do me a favor and give me a green check if this is the first time you've come to one of these trainings? If you're brand new joining us for the first time. Okay. So in the toolkit that I showed you, there are links to the tools. When you click the link, you'll be invited to make a copy of each tool. Once you make a copy of the tool, it's yours to adapt as you wish, okay? The way that we'll look at them today is all linked together, and you can link your copies together too with our help. The user guide that I referenced in the beginning has specific detailed directions that Kelly created for you to select the tools that work for your team and link them together so that you have the same kind of toolkit that we're going to show you today. I have a question. Am I going to send out another email closer to the start date about that class? The Cal All PD catalog, Teaching and Learning, these PD teams, our catalog, I believe, goes out next Thursday, the 20th. It'll be emailed out to everyone that has the Teaching and Learning Bulletin. When I send you a follow-up email for this training series, which will have recordings of all the webinars and everything, you go all the way down my email, there's a place for you to click a link to subscribe to the Teaching and Learning Bulletin for professional development. I really encourage you to subscribe. There's going to be a lot of offerings, and they're all going to be focused on supporting you in this digital space. All right, so we're going to start talking. I just want to remind you that we're going to go to that solutions tracker. I'm going to go to it right now and see Okay, we've got like 22. We've got 22 people in there out of, let's see. Hey, that's not bad, out of 29. I'm glad. That's pretty good odds, pretty good odds. So we're going to go back. And talk about our first set of solutions, things we can do to collaborate with families to ensure students are available for instruction, service, and ongoing assessment. All right. Now, this is the part where I'm going to give you the long soliloquy about how to use these tools in a safe way, and of course, the news about SEDS, how it's still the system of record. So bear with me because all this information is important. This is a template that you and your LEA can use to bring communication, engagement, progress, and service delivery data into view in one tool. So you can take all kinds of input on a student and have it in a one-stop shop, and it will create student-level summary pages as well as high-level overview pages that lets you take a look at your student body or your caseload. And so I want you to think about how all of these pieces are optional. This is a template that you can take what you want and leave the rest. But I do encourage you as we look at each piece to think about how you are going to collect that same information, if not with this tool. Before I show you the tool, I want to make 3 really important points. The first point is that it's your responsibility to work with your LEA to ensure that you're following data privacy protocols. The kind of information that will live in this tool is sensitive student information, so you have to make sure wherever you store it is FERPA compliant. We're going to share it in Google Drive, but that's only because it's the easiest way to share it. If your LEA has determined that your Google access is FERPA compliant, then you can use it in Google. But if your LEA does not use Google Drive to share or store information, then you can download the templates and store them in your secure cloud-based application. Second point, this tool is really a sample of what you and your LEA can do to make data-driven decisions. You're welcome to customize and use the tool in whichever way makes sense for your LEA. You can use all of it, some of it, none of it, but we hope that there are at least a few pieces that will be useful to you and your team. It's yours, okay? It's yours to use, and when you get it, right, I'm asking you to make a copy. The reason I'm doing that is so you know and I know that we are not working in the same tool. So first things first, we're not going to be editing each other's stuff. But much more importantly, you can feel secure knowing that other LEAs and OSSI are not looking at the data you're collecting in the tool. Give me a green check if you understand what I'm saying. You heard me. You know this is yours. Nobody's going to be peeking. Okay, good. We're not going to be all right. So I had a question. What tab should we focus on today? So in the, are you talking about in the Google chart paper? The tab at the Google chart paper, we're going to go tab by tab as we work through solutions, and so I'll point out which tab we'll use when we get to that part. No worries. Okay, so final point. Here we get to the fun part. This tool doesn't replace SEDS. SEDS continues to be the system of record, and everything you're required to put in SEDS, you still have to put in SEDS, even if you use this tool to a T. The tool does have redundancies with SEDS, and so it's up to you and your team to decide if it's worth it to have some redundancies, to have everything in sort of a clean one-stop shop for information. If your team is able to achieve that with SEDS through their successful navigation, you may not need all of the pieces. If you'd rather have everything in one place, though, it might be worth inputting some things that you already put into SEDS in here so that you've got everything in one spot. The data tool relies on input from forms, a student communication and input form, a parent communication and input form, an educator input form, and a service tracker. Okay? All of that feeds into the student dashboard, which combines data from the input forms with data that's manually input from assessments, IEP goals and progress, and due dates. And it will display information on the student's needs, their progress, their engagement, their service provision log, and the communication log with their families, with family, students, and educator. That's the student version. All of the data also feeds into a summary dashboard. It's populated from the same input forms, and it displays information for all students on immediate student needs, communication with students and families and educators, engagement, and timeliness for IEPs and evaluations. Okay, so I'm going to show you what I've been talking about here. All right. Can I get a green check if you see example of sample students data tool with data on your screen? Big Google sheet. A green check if you see that. Thank you so much. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to look at a student page, okay? So this is a student dashboard. It's a summary for an individual student. If you look, you'll see there's some gray fields, okay? Those are ones you'll have to fill out. Everything else will auto-populate from the input tools that we've talked about, okay? So the next section is needs identified, okay? So these are needs that have been identified by family, by the student, by the educator, and have been recorded in input forms. For example, if a student said they wanted help with time management and a parent said they wanted help with food security, those two things would populate up front so that they would remind you whenever you look at the student sheet. Do me a favor, guys. Everybody uncheck your green check because I'm going to ask you a question. Okay. So if you are a special educator or have ever been a special education teacher and you have been a lifeline for a student or a family in a way that was not described to you when you decided to be a teacher, please give me a green check now. Okay, all right. You find that you fill a lot of roles for students. That's because as the entire society has learned most recently, the education system fills a lot of roles apart from academic supports, right? And so we need a place to be able to continue to advocate for our students as whole individuals. And so it was important to Kelly and I that those things showed up right away so that we wouldn't, because we were lacking face-to-face contact with our students, we wouldn't lose the ability to be their advocates and to help them, okay? So that way it'll come, you know, it's the kind of stuff that will go in there. It's the kind of thing you would just sort of know if you saw the kid every day, but you might not see right now. And besides that, we're all pretty busy right now, so it's much easier to drop balls than it used to be. The next section down is the engagement information. So it reports engagement and instruction as reported by educators and engagement in service delivery as reported by providers. It's important because we want kids to engage in learning, but also it's important because if we aren't hearing from the student, we aren't seeing the student, and we're in a remote learning posture, we don't know if they're healthy and safe. We need to gather that information somewhere because if we don't see them, we don't know anything about what their needs are, and that can be really alarming in these circumstances. Okay, underneath that is engagement in service delivery. That's a service record. And then there's some self-reported student information, which is important. So the student has the opportunity in their input forms to report the kind of learning experiences that they find valuable That is going to be very important as we continue to tweak students' distance learning plans or their IEPs or their accommodations to make sure that we're continuing to engage them and that we're mitigating regression, supporting recovery, and even making progress. The next section is a place for assessment results. I probably will get in here and do a little tweaking, to be honest with you, based upon the continuous education and recovery plans. I was able to get more specific information about what assessments that LEAs are using, and so I will be able to put more specific information instead of just content areas right here. And so just so you're aware, this will probably get tweaked just a little bit now that I have more information from you about how you're going to gather students' present levels and other assessment information. The next section should look familiar to you if you went to the IEP Quality Series. It is the progress monitoring tracker that I shared with you, and the one that's embedded in here still does all the same cool tricks that the other one did. What you do is you just paste the student's goals out of STED in these boxes. You put their scores for their progress monitoring here, and when they get to mastery, it turns green. Also, each one of these boxes auto-generates a pivot table chart that you can send home to families or email to families so they can see how the student is doing towards each of their goals in a way that is easy to visualize. There's communication logs for families, students, and educators, and a service tracker. It's a lot, right? It's a lot, but it's a lot of good stuff. So on both the student input and family input communication logs, there's a space to record action steps following communication. It's important to keep this information together. I think it's going to be particularly difficult to keep track of all the different needs that folks have, and I think having a place to put your action steps and follow up and to track that is really important. So we just put a place over on the far on the side, you have to scroll over to find it, that will help you to keep track of if you got some information from a student or a family member or a teacher, what do we do about it and when? Just that is also going to be very helpful in your documentation and follow-up. The next part I'm going to share with you is the summary dashboard. So all of this was student by student. I think you can probably imagine that you can print this off, you can use it to generate reports, you can send it home as progress, or you can keep it, turn it into a PDF and load it into SEDS. If a student's going to be moving from one LEA to another, or just to document the work that you have done, all of that is your choice to do. This is student by student. But something else that would be very helpful, particularly as we have to keep, we're building this plane while we're flying it, right? And so we're going to need a lot of data to keep tweaking and making changes so that we give students what they need across the school. So this is the summary dashboard. The idea on this dashboard is to provide highlights and summaries from all the data collected on all the students. Again, we hope that we have provided you with a way to immediately capture immediate needs and to see them first and foremost whenever you check on how kids are doing. So there's questions on the input forms that allow you to collect information about physical health and safety, housing, hunger and food security, emotional well-being. I say this every time and I'll say it again. I imagine that this would be a place where you would keep information that would help you if you had cases, positive cases of COVID once we're back in brick and mortar schools, so that you could keep track of interventions. Furthermore, if you had students that were having a lot of difficulty complying with social distancing expectations, or mask wearing, or not crossing cohorts, things like that, it would be very helpful to make those like first and foremost sort of concerns that you could recognize right away and generate interventions for everyone's health and safety. So the idea here is we're going to do highlights and summaries for all the data, and you can also use this to create tiers of support. Depending on your context and your existing system, it may make sense for your whole LEA to use one big summary, or you may want to go building by building, cluster by cluster, school by school, or if you're joining me today and you are a teacher with a caseload of, I don't know, 16, and you want to keep track of your students, you can use this too, right? It doesn't have to be an administrator driving this particular bus. You can certainly work with other special educators, especially if you're departmentalized in your service provision, to kind of get all on one page and streamline some of your documentation. Okay, so first things first, we've got immediate needs. When did we hear about this? Who needs some support? How do we know? The next most important thing is very similar to the student level sheet. It is, have we heard from these families? Do we know how people are doing? Are students attending? Are they engaged? Are we contacting families? It's important to pull out, and this automatically happens, but if you have families that have not been contacted in the last 30 days, they will automatically, or haven't successfully contacted in the last 30 days, they'll automatically populate in this box here, starting at row 32, and that will help you to kind of get a little red flag that says, I need to figure out how to get in touch with these families so that I know that everyone's safe. And we figure out how to get this kid engaged. The engagement data, very similar to the student dashboard, except it lets you take a 10,000-foot view. Are we having a student show up for synchronous instruction, but they're not doing asynchronous stuff? Are students attempting but not completing remote learning or service assignments? Are students engaging in their service delivery as reported by providers? And then at the bottom here, you can see if this calls out students with 0 minutes of these 4 different types of attendance and engagement. This is important because if you haven't heard from the student or they haven't showed up, you need that to populate so that you can do some outreach. Finally, there's timeliness indicators. We ask you in the beginning to put IEP due dates and eligibility dates in on each student sheet. And once you do that, it will give you some reminders of what's coming up in the next 30 days and what is overdue. I know it's a lot. Take some deep breaths. All right, we got some questions. What is educator input? Okay, so I am going to show you the educator input form in just a moment. I'm going to take a breath and ask if there are any questions that you'd like to drop into the chat at this time before we move forward and look at the forms that feed this. Anybody have any questions? I'll give it a couple minutes and drink some water. It's a lot of talking. While you think it over, I just want to tell you, I know it's a lot. You can always reach out to me. You have some time to digest this and look through everything and you have questions. I'm happy to respond to your questions. And also remember that this is a sample tool. You can copy it and use it exactly as it is. You can customize it or not use it at all. The point here is to provide you with an example of how you can set up a system to reinforce that what we already know, which is that we're going to need data to identify and address students' needs, to engage families and students and educators, to track engagement, and to make educational decisions. Is the tool transferable to Microsoft Office? Yes, we have offered to do so for those larger LEAs that may use that. Kelly is more than willing to change that over. And so stay tuned. We haven't gotten an answer at the LEA level, but we are more than willing to do that on a principal by principal basis. So hit me up in my email if that's something you're interested in. It absolutely can be done. It's going to be time consuming for Kelly, so we want to make sure that if we transfer it over to another platform like that, that it's something that's going to be used. Yes, please do email me. All right, so going back to our slides for a moment, just a moment before we get back into the cool tools. All right, so first solution, right, for how we're gonna do this. How are we going to engage families and make sure we have students available to receive services and available for assessment? So let me show you that family input survey, and then while I'm there, I'll show you the educator input form. Good deal? I'm just going to answer myself. Good deal. Okay. Let me see. All right. So everybody see the family input form? Give me a green check. Thank you. I want to open by saying that this is a lot of information that we're trying to collect. So at the very least, in the beginning, you'll want to do this in a way that's more like an interview, where you are speaking with the family and you are recording the information. Perhaps that way, the parents, the next time they do it, they've had some support to understand exactly what they're being asked. I also want to remind you that you'll have your own copy and you can keep or replace or add whatever you want to and tweak this as the year goes on and your questions change. Okay, so the first thing that you're going to see is some student information. The most important thing for you to remember is that you need to make sure that the student's first and last name are spelled exactly as they are in the big student data tool, because that is the way we know they'll feed into the right page. Okay, so make sure that those match. There's a date of family contact, how you reached out to them, why you reached out to them. Remember, when I do these kinds of examples for you in training, there's a lot of questions because I try to represent all the things you might want to collect. That doesn't mean you have to use every single one of them. It's just to give you, like, it's much easier for you to delete things you don't need than to have to try to figure out what's possibly missing. Contact information, this is really important. How they prefer to be contacted. Then section 1 is about their students' engagement in remote learning and how they're feeling about it and what their concerns are. If their students participating, if they feel like they're doing enough, not doing enough. And then information about their internet access. Another customizable piece is, generally speaking, when is your child available to engage in service provision or remote learning? You can change these windows to appear however you want them to. And whatever the expectations are for availability for service provision for your providers. Any other specifics or considerations that we should know? We're trying to schedule time with your child. So if you've got a child that is supervising one or more siblings during a certain part of the day, you're going to not want to schedule right during that time. So this provides a place for parents to give you that information. Or like, please don't schedule this for when I'm giving my webinars in the afternoons, right? So special education services, how you feeling about it? How's it going? Or is your student getting appropriate behavioral supports or intervention? Do we have the right accommodations and modifications? Have we adapted them for remote learning? Is it working out? Are there other things your student needs help with? Are there things your whole family needs help with? Do you have any additional questions or concerns? Do you want to meet? So this is a family input form. Okay. Next thing I'm going to show you is the student service tracker. Then we're going to look at that educator input form. So we can gather input from providers regarding service provision that can help us make decisions about this data-driven decisions about whether or not the student has received educational benefit, how we might want to amend an IEP, so on and so forth. Let me swap back over to that really quickly. Nope, that's not it. Nope. Yes, here we are. Weekly student service tracker with data. So just so you know, you can copy the sections for the students up to 10 times, I believe, so that a service provider could sit down and fill this out one time for 10 kids. And it will all feed into the right kids' data, just so you know. So if you're already thinking like, oh, they're not going to want to do this, I'm not going to want to do this, just know that there are ways that you can make copies that allow you to very quickly get this done with one big form as opposed to having to do this a million times. So there's a place for you to put your information. Again, you want to be very, very specific and clear about the spelling of the student's first and last name. Recording attempted minutes that the student participated in, notes if the student did not participate, and then a record of service provision attempts. So when did you try to do it? How many minutes were you trying to meet for? What were you trying to do? What happened? Did the student unavailable? Did they cancel? And then any links to relevant documentation you might want to share. So that's the service tracker. This is very specific to students with disabilities. Just like the other input forms, it'll create charts and graphs and detailed information for you in the responses category that you can pull out, print, use, and you can also, with any of these forms, and I know this seems like a lot, but you can also make a separate sheet and do other cool data tricks with it if you wanted to. Okay? So, oops. Educator input form. Okay. The educator input form, Suzanne, just so that you know, this is very similar to the teacher input form that we used in the IEP quality series. We have not, we've changed it to be relevant to now, but it's based on the same principles as that sheet. So that responds to your question. So again, you've got student information, educator information. This time the educator is telling us about how the student engaged in remote learning. So you may imagine this as what the teacher, whether it's a gen ed teacher, resource room teacher, self-contained teacher is filling out, and separate from the related service provider. So what percent of synchronous periods did they attend? What percent of asynchronous work did they complete? What did they attempt? What did they actually finish in terms of assignments? What are they doing well? With some details. What are they struggling with that they may need more support with? And as much as possible, linking that to content standards or IEP goals. Their strengths, their needs for support. So up here, it's more strengths that are content-based or IEP goal-based. Here, we're looking more at executive function and student skills. Okay? Also, you have the opportunity as the educator to say what you feel the student or family might need to more effectively engage in remote learning. If you have a concern, we've created a box that allows you to require folks on your team or for you to drop. You can actually link PDFs in if you want, or put a long answer text where you just drop a Google link that allows you to document Any communication that's outside of this data tool about concerns and interventions. So you can truly keep all of your documentation in one place, a little box for you to drop it in. There's a section for you to give feedback on the accommodations and modifications, if they're working or not, what adaptations you might suggest, and then there's a place for additional comments and concerns at the bottom. Any questions about the educator input form? Okay. So remember, we're focusing on how we're going to get the data that we need to describe how these students are doing. If you have attended an IEP quality training with me, you know that we try to triangulate, right? We want to look at the students' existing data from their most recent evaluation. We want to look at more recent assessment data that describes their academic and functional performance. Assessment scores, observation notes, all of these things. But the third leg of the triangle is input from the students themselves, their families, and the teachers that serve them. And so this is helping us to beef up that input piece when we may be in a situation where the recent assessment leg of the stool is going to be kind of wobbly. Give me a green check if that makes sense to you as the purpose of this. Okay. All right, we're in the questions now. Now we can pick the tab. Any school leaders out there who are interested in taking all of this and using it to train your staff, and you want me to help you, get this ready for an in-house training, you just let me know. Send me an email. All right, so we're in tab 1, collaborate with families to ensure students are available. So there's 2 questions. You can see them here. How can you use the data collected using these tools to ensure students are available? And how can your solutions help you keep collecting the data that you'll need as things continue to change? I didn't mention this explicitly, but I'm going to mention it now. You're not going to collect this information once. People ask me, how often should I be doing these really long input forms? I would say if it were me, I would do at interim and at the quarter minimally. In addition to that, if there is a big change, either for an individual student or say we make a shift, or there's a big change in circumstances, like just generally speaking in our city, right? We're going to want to be able to describe the student circumstances. So if we shift from virtual learning to blended learning, their circumstances have changed. So we're going to want to give it a couple of days and then kind of get some feedback, right? And see how it's going. So I'm going to give you, I'm going to give you 4 minutes to go into this sheet and put your own answers to these 2 questions. If you see that somebody's in there typing, just pick somewhere else to type. If you want to do multiple lines, just when you get to the end of the cell, click Control Enter, and you are more than welcome to go in and like stretch these boxes out so that you have more room to type. Okay, we're going to give you 4 minutes. We've got 22 people in there, so I'm going to be reasonable and say I'd love to see 3 or 4 new answers. Go. So while you're solving all our problems, I just want to tell you I had a couple of questions come in. So I just wanted to tell you that all of these forms that I am showing you, you can obtain a copy of them by going into the toolkit and clicking the link to the form. A little box will pop up that says, do you want to make a copy? And you say yes, and then you have your own copy. When it comes time to glue them all back together so they work as one system like mine does, you will just go to the little user guide and follow the step-by-step directions. If you get stuck or hung up on anything, you can email me, and I am more than happy to help you. All right, I see some answers. I'm super excited about this. So let's see what we've got. All right, so how can we use this data to make sure students are available? Thank you, Anonymous Llama. Data will show if a student is avoiding just one class, right? We'll know. Uh-oh, what happened to Anonymous Llama's comment? Somebody overtyped them. So as our data evolves, our goals will get more informed, right? Our stakeholders will be more informed, and our students' needs will be placed first. That's right, Anonymous Hippo. That's the goal here. As the data changes, you can adjust services. Exactly. We can inform ourselves about what is actually working. Right? And so that's why we're here, to figure out how to make this actually work. Okay, I'm going to zip back over here. Thank you for your answers. I really appreciate it. We looked at our solutions. All right. Now, let's talk about using appropriate assessments to understand each student's needs for support. So we've looked at the sample student data tool, and we're going to answer some questions about that now, how we can use it to figure out what further assessment is needed. So I'm going to go to the next tab, Use Appropriate Assessments. There's a lot of questions here. One is, how can you identify areas that need further assessment and select appropriate assessment tools? Think about those input forms that you might receive from any of those stakeholder groups, the educators, the kids themselves, the parents. The student input form I didn't show you yet, but it looks very similar to the parent input form, but it starts off by just asking them, how are you doing? How's this going for you? Okay. The second question is, how can you use this tool to document assessment results and monitor progress? Okay. How can you use it with a tiered support snapshot? I'm going to show you that in just a sec, to address needs for universal, targeted, or individualized supports. And how can you use it with our promising practice resource matrix? Let me scoot into these other things I have not yet shown you, this tiered support snapshot and the promising practice resource matrix, so you can come back here and answer some questions. So I've included for you a tiered support snapshot. It's just a picture of an RTI or MTSS sort of triangle to help you think about, if you were looking at that data summary page that showed all your students, how could you take that data and develop supports based on the data that shows needs, right? So think about that. You've got this, you've got it linked into your in your toolkit. And once you identify needs, you also have this promising practice resource matrix that you can also open up through your toolkit. And it's got lots of different resources that we've curated. I'll be honest with you, I haven't updated this in a while, but I need to. There are a lot of new things out there that I want to add. I've got this endless supply of like tabs that I have open of things I want to drop in here. But that's what you should be doing too, right? If you've got this matrix and you have teachers that want to improve their online teaching, how are they going to do that? Drop some resources that you know work in here. You looked at your summary data sheet, right? And you see that you're having a lot of difficulty. Excuse me, I'm going to make you sick. Scrolling so fast. You're having a lot of difficulty supporting parents to facilitate learning at home. Well, there's resources to get you started in here, but you can also find resources that work for you and drop them in for your staff, okay? So those are the two things that I'm referring to in those questions, these last 2 questions. So let's take another 4 minutes, and I would love to see 3 or 4 responses about how you could, and I think let's focus on how we could identify areas for further assessment, because I think it's pretty obvious that there's a place to monitor progress in there and document assessment. So let's focus on how we can identify needs for further assessment and how we can peer support. So this one and that one. 3 minutes. Go. I love this. I think it'll be useful for creating small groups for instruction. Absolutely. You can think about this as a school-wide tool, but you can also think about this as a classroom tool. And I maybe didn't give enough examples, but yes, you could really get a lot of information. I think it empowers you to get more information than you might typically from your general education teaching partners too, about what you need to be doing and how you need to be grouping students when you have them for their resource supports. I think that's definitely worth digging into and thinking about. Let me give you another minute. Folks, on occasion, people will try to get a copy of one or more of these forms, and they'll get a message saying that they're not in the organization or whatever. I would love it if you could click the request permission box so that I get an email automatically that tells me that you want permission, and then I can share it with you as view only so you can make a copy. That would be great. All right, thank you for sharing these ideas. I just want to underscore that this is available to you, and you can continue to use it and add to it. If you decide to use this with your staff, if you're a school leader, special education leader, you can share your ideas with us and we can all grow. I certainly am going to go digging around in here before I offer this series again, so that I have some of your examples to work with of how this can be useful. And I would love for you to continue to add to it. I know you got a lot on your plate and a lot to try to remember to do, but I think it's one way that we can collaborate digitally to make sure that we're learning from each other, even when we don't get to see each other. All right, pop back out to the slideshow. Showed you this and that. All right, any questions that you want to put in the chat box for me? Okay, everybody uncheck your green check mark real quick. Just click it again to uncheck it. Thank you. All right. If you don't have any questions because you think this is either so much or so awesome that you just need more time to process it, give me a green check. If you're not asking questions because you're like, nah, this is too much, not so much, but too much, and I don't feel like this is something that I can really do, give me the red X. Thank you. I appreciate that feedback. It is a lot, but I just want to remind you that you can eat this elephant one bite at a time, as they say. You don't have to try to do all of this at once, and you can, particularly if you are a leader who is going to be onboarding staff and they've got lots of new things to learn, doing this piece by piece might be a really smart way to go. All right, so we looked at our solutions. Much appreciated. Finally, last but definitely not least, heavens, hold on a second now. All right. Using data to consider individual student receipt of educational benefit. So the reason that we built this, right, was to help you use student-specific data to develop, implement, and review the efficacy of the individualized supports for students with disabilities that you have. We want to help you move the needle for kids and to mitigate regression and support recovery. But we also understand that there's a lot of other stuff on your mind, and that's we're going to have to do some calculations here about missed services, receipt of educational benefit, and we're going to have to do that on a student by student basis, and we want to make sure that you have all the tools that you need to do that. And so I hope that you will use the tools to support students, but also to help yourself to deal with this stressful process of measuring student progress, regression, or needs for additional supports and services. So here are some questions that you can think about that are part of the receipt of educational benefit sort of checklist of considerations and the tools that can help you to answer those questions. The first consideration is, has one or more extended school closures occurred? Well, you can use your school calendar or notices of operating status. You can also use your educator input surveys to note if services were not available to a student. Are there services in the student's IEP that could not be delivered remotely? We have a service adaptation worksheet that I'll show you in just a second that I showed in part one, but we'll repeat looking at that now, that can help you to see what options were considered for adaptations to services rather than just not delivering services, and what services were refused or deemed impossible to provide at this time. Has the provision of services been delayed? The student and family and educator all have the opportunity to record whether service provision has been delayed and why. Finally, has the student been available to receive their services? There is a place to document service refusal on the service adaptation worksheet and also in the sample educator input survey. Please use the toolkit. It'll help you do all of these things that you're going to be thinking about for a long time to come. Okay, so let's go look at that adaptation worksheet, and then we'll think about how we could use it. Whoops. This is just like one of the least exciting tools I've shared with you today, but it is really important. It gives you sort of a template for thinking through conversations about service adaptations with families so that you are able to document that you had this conversation, that there were considerations, there were options on the table, that there was a team decision, and to document parent decision as well, and also to document when you sent that prior written notice. Okay? So rather than going back and having you go back into this tracker. Well, I will go back to the tracker for just a second, but I think the answers are pretty obvious. It's important for you to think about how you can use that worksheet or the input from teachers, service providers, families to gather information that is documentation of your attempts to provide service and the family or student's response to those attempts. I just want to point out to you that in every one of those input forms, stakeholder input forms, there is a place for someone to say, yes, the student attended, or my student's only been attending X hours a week, or for the student to say, yeah, I haven't really been going to that, and here's why, okay? And so you are collecting and triangulating your collection of information about service provision. Also, the input forms from all the stakeholders can provide you with really important information about what service adaptations might be most appropriate for the student based on their experience in distance or blended learning. So you may gather input information that says, hey, we were really primarily worried about this service, but now as an IEP team, we see that we need to think about how we're delivering this service very differently, or what changes we need to make to this service to make it more appropriate for the student's current circumstances. Okay. Anybody have any other questions to put in the chat right now? Okay, folks, I am going to take, hold on just a second, I'm going to send it to just one person. I'm going to put the survey up for you now in the chat. Again, this is my mechanism for attendance. I really encourage you, I'm sorry, you can hear my child waking up. I really encourage you to fill out the survey to make sure that you get your PLUs, but also to give me feedback that will tell me what will be helpful for you in the future. I'm going to be looking at the chat for questions for the next couple of minutes, and I'm going to open up, oh, this is my contact information. Oh, not that. They took my phone away. They need to use it for somebody who does licensure. Just email me. Just email me. That is the way to go. I am going to go here. So this is what your session survey will look like. And once I have gotten responses, I will go and I will take attendance. Once I take attendance in our registration system, you should automatically get a PLU certificate. If you have not gotten a PLU certificate by the end of the day tomorrow, please shoot me an email, because I will wait for people to finish the survey until the end of the day tomorrow, and then I will take attendance and I will send those out to you right away. You will get a request to take another survey once I mark you attended, and I apologize for that. You're going to get double surveyed, but our automatic registration system has been a little glitchy, and I want to absolutely ensure that you get credit for attending, and that I don't drop anybody off of the PLU list. I also want to make sure I get your feedback, because it's important to me for making things for fall. Thank you very much for being here today. I'm always excited to work with you. Oh wait, the form speaks of accommodations adaptation. Can you share where this is found? There's a question. Yes, I can. So it's linked in the toolkit, but this is what it looks like. This is an accommodation adaptation matrix. It's just a way of thinking about, so this is just a sort of just a reminder of what the accommodation types are. But then there are tables that give you examples of existing accommodations and how you might adapt them for remote learning. Like everything else in here, it's a living document. So if you want to keep a record of different adaptations you've made and drop them into this form. So like if you have a meeting and the parent says, hey, this is not working, we want to try this instead, and it's really successful, I would consider dropping those successful adaptations into your team-wide or school-wide adaptation matrix so that everybody is able to access the good ideas of their peers or the parents that are serving kids at home. Does that answer your question?
Okay. Okay.
Okay, great. I'm glad to hear that. So I'm just going to mute myself